This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Lives Online Conversation 2022 Festival Edition. Please join me, Kelly Devine, the Artistic Director, and Nina Strike, the Executive Director, as we welcome Director Scott Morris and Mary Bruno and Carl Alderson from the film American River, which can be seen as part of our in-person programming starting September 19th and running through the 25th, and part of our virtual programming September the 26th through October the 2nd. All of the information about all of our screenings, including American River's 2 screenings, can be found at peacefilmfest.org. Now, please welcome Scott, Mary, and Carl. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. It's great to have you here with us. And I'm going to start by asking Carl to tell us about the film.
I mean, Scott.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
Well, Carl can tell us too.
I'm happy to step in, Scott, if you need me.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm on.
Scott, yes.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Take it away.
Well, first, thanks for inviting us to show the film at the Global Peace Film Festival. It's a great opportunity. I'm really excited about showing it there and also coming down and participating in the screenings. I was the producer, director, editor of the film, and to tell you a little bit about it, American River is an 85-minute documentary feature about a 4-day kayak trip down one of the most beautiful and neglected rivers in the country, New Jersey's Passaic River. And the project came about because I live a few blocks from the river and didn't know anything about it. And as a filmmaker, I was curious to possibly explore a project about it. And Mary Bruno was doing a book talk at a local town and about a book she wrote called An American River, From Paradise to Superfund, about her experiences with the river. And the book is this wonderful blend of memoir, science, nature, ecology, and it's centered on a trip that she had done back in 2010 with river guide Carl Alderson, where they explored the entire river. And the book really centers its story on that trip that they took. So I read the book and I learned more about the Passaic than I ever realized I could learn about it. It's an amazing river with a crazy course, an incredible history, and some big issues too. And so in looking for my next project, I thought, and it seemed like a little bit of an outrageous idea, but I thought, let me give Mary a call and see if she would consider doing the kayak trip again for a documentary on what would be a new adventure down the river. We're talking about 10 years later now, 2018. And she thought it was a fantastic idea. We had some meetings and we mounted this really large project to make the film. And the condition was, she told me that I'll go on the trip and do this again as long as my river guide, Carl Alderson, can join me. And the great thing is we've got them both here as part of this recording today. So they're going to weigh in on various things about the experience. So the project, fell after I did another documentary about a New Jersey environmental issue related to a place called the Great Swamp, which has an incredible story about how local people preserved it after there was a threat of building an enormous airport there back in the 1960s. And the people who got behind that film and funded it, when it was done, they said, well, what's next? So I approached them, and our main funder for that project, Dillard Kirby, came on board, who was a local philanthropist, read Mary's book. I pitched the idea to him, and he funded it substantially. And in a way, it was like a filmmaker's dream come true, because we were able to really make a major production surrounding this trip. I had quite a vision for it, which was, the trip is 80 miles long. It's 4 days. It starts at a wildlife preserve, and 80 miles later, it ends at the largest Superfund site in the nation, which is a deeply troubled part of the river at the mouth of in Newark, the city of Newark. And our trip was going to go the entire distance of the river. And so we mounted a large production at a 15-person crew. We had 10 cameras, all in 4K, GoPros, drones, land-based cameras, a camera boat that traveled along with them. They were wearing microphones, and we recorded their conversations along the way, which were absolutely delightful. And they add a sense of humor to the film that I think makes the film a little different than you'd expect from an environmental documentary. It's kind of a buddy picture in a way about a kayak trip. So the shoot went really well, but we shot 150 hours of footage, and it was an enormous undertaking. We finished the principal shoot in 2018. We did some additional shooting in 2019, and I spent virtually the entire pandemic in my home studio editing the film and remotely finishing it. And very pleased that we finished it late last year. And it's just beginning to gain some traction with film festivals and getting out there. And we're optimistic about distribution. We're talking a deal with an education distributor and also a possible agent for other potential for the film. So I guess that's pretty much the overarching story. I mean, there's a lot more to tell about it, but I think the main thing for this audience is the film is really an enjoyable, appealing experience. Despite the darker undertones of the story, it really has a very positive message. And the message is also universal in a lot of ways, because a lot of the issues that are facing the Passaic River, the pollution and whatnot, are kind of issues that thousands of rivers are facing across the country and the world. And we're already getting responses well outside of the region from people who've seen the film who really get the message and enjoy it. So why don't we move it along? Maybe we can hear from Mary and Carl now.
So Scott, the only thing I think you left off from your wonderful description of the film is how beautiful it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing is, you know, I have a track record of making all kinds of films, and I have I wanted it to be very cinematic. And so the idea of the way we covered it with, you know, the highest possible quality, the best cameras from the air, the land, the water, with really good audio, really makes it just really beautiful to watch. And obviously, because we had so much footage, there was a tremendous amount of editing, and all that footage is mixed in a beautiful way. And then I should mention too that, you know, we have wonderful graphics that kind of orient you on the river wherever you are along the trip. And I have a great score that, little nepotism here, was composed by my son, Ben Morris, who, by the way, is a Fulbright scholar who just got his doctorate in composition. And it was just great working together so closely with him for a good part of last year on the score.
Oh, it's great. No, it really does show. And turning now to Mary, you know, was it the novelist Thomas Wolfe who said you can't go home again? Well, you go home twice in essence. You go home to write the novel, and then you go back again for that experience as a part of the filmmaking experience. So can you tell us a little bit about, you know, that aspect of telling this story?
Double dip. Yeah, let me think of where to start. You know, I think that growing up in New Jersey, and this didn't really occur to me until years later, that the part of New Jersey I grew up in, which is the very industrialized and pretty densely populated northeastern part, was pretty manhandled. And, you know, most of nature was either, you know, covered over or paved over or just completely unrecognizable. Like I remember there's a little scene in the book where I'm looking out over the meadows, the New Jersey meadowlands, which I had known since I was a child, and realized for the first time, because I was in graduate school at the time, that it's a marsh. oh my God, it's a marsh. And it's so sort of disguised that it's kind of hard to know that. And I think that's true of a lot of the places in Jersey that I was familiar with. But one of the things that was interesting about going back home to do the book is that I went to a place that was, for all intents and purposes, really unfamiliar, or the impression that I had of the Passaic was, an impression of a downstreamer. And when I paddled the upper river and started finding out about the river, I was just sort of appalled at, I don't know, my own lack of curiosity, the educational system that I grew up so close to so many natural wonders and so much history and geology. And I'd never heard anything about it. So I was like this, 40-year-old novice coming home to a place that I thought I knew. And you know what, like, I didn't know it at all. So it was a wonderful revelation. And one other thing I want to point out is that the book itself and the movie as well, when you write about a river, you write about a lot of different things. Rivers have really rich and very wide ranging stories. Again, it's about geology, it's about ecology, it's about history, it's about people, it's about hydrology. And in the case of the Passaic, it's about law and public policy and advocacy. There's just, it's a stew of different themes. And that's a problem sometimes for editors, and definitely a problem for marketing departments, because they don't know what your film or what your book is. Is it a history book? Is it geology? Is it a memoir? What is it? And the thing is, like, yes, it's all those things, because the river is the main character, and the river has so many stories to tell through so many different lenses. So I don't know if I'm actually answering your question.
Oh, you are.
Okay.
Are.
All right, good.
You
So
are indeed.
anyway, it was really odd to come home to a place. Home took on a very different meaning, because it was a very unfamiliar home when I paddled down the river.
Well, and I think that sense of reawakening really comes through in the film. And it's something that, as people, and I hope everyone listening to this seeks out this film, I think that's something that we step into your shoes in that regard.
Oh,
and
good.
I
Okay.
hope people then see their own, open their eyes to their own environments and their own communities, and see them in that kind of reawakened way that you do.
It was really interesting, Kelly. Like, so I wrote this book and I thought, what am I going to learn? I know everything about the Passaic River, And as Scott interviewed, there are a lot of people that he interviewed for the film, just, river rats, basically, people who live along the river or who had some sort of truck with the river, that didn't appear in the book. So here I am, I'm sitting listening, not as a reporter, but almost just as a viewer to all these interviews, and people telling these stories about the river and how they loved it. And they went boating on it, and they went, they walked around in it. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I realized more than anything else, listening to some of those interviews, what a different experience other people had of the Passaic than the one that I had. And that my experience of the Passaic was not the experience, it was an experience of the Passaic. And that was really a revelation, even at this point, after I'd written the book. So, and one last thing.
Yeah.
Anything that you do with Carl Alderson is fun, like a little scary, but mostly really fun. So you can't not have a good time if you're hanging out with Carl.
Well, that's a great segue, because I was just going to turn to you, Carl. Carl, you are the river guide, but what was that like being directed by Scott, or were you directed in any way by Scott?
Scott, of course, tried in vain. No, he did an excellent job.
To interject, I would say that Carl directed me. I was really relying on Carl to be our river guide as much as Mary was in the kayak. So
there's only so much control that you can have when you set two people afloat on a big river. Now, here's what Scott had to contend with, and it's the same thing that Mary and I had to contend with. You have this tiny little river, and it's all green and lush. And at the end, it's gray, and it's part of the industrial complex of the United States. It's got maybe a little bit of a nutrient overload at the beginning from some lawns and farms. And by the end, it's one of the hottest contamination spots for one of Earth's deadliest man-made chemicals, dioxin. And at the beginning, it's got this beautiful path fast moving water through a gorge, and it's very scenic. And so we love it, right? But at the end, it's big and wide, and there's things floating in it that you don't really want to see necessarily. And Mary and I have to do that. We have to contend with all that, but Scott has to contend with all that too. From this tiny, narrow corridor to this big scene with just, traffic and train bridges and cars and just, this noisy environment. Just getting the kayaks loaded and unloaded in some safe spot on the side of a road is a challenge. So, Mary and I, we had to jump over logs, and Scott had to hurdle everything else. We had the plastics that we had to paddle through, and scummy areas, and either grab the boats and slug through the mud and the brambles and get cut up, or hop over these big logs. And Scott, he had to set cameras up around all of that stuff. And he had not only cameras on the banks, but he had them on the boats. He had microphones on us. He had drones in the air.
Yeah.
Mary and I didn't know what was where it was coming from or when it was coming. This team was crackerjack, and they had us in their view the whole time. So all we had to really do is manage ourselves, talk about what we're seeing, be the thread that sort of carries through the full narrative, right? The boat the boat trip sort of carries the story, right? It's the thread that winds its way through the whole thing. Just like the river, it just winds its way through.
Though, Carl, go ahead.
One more thing too.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that we had these challenges, during the shoot, I mean, from my point of view, I had an incredibly good time making the film. I mean, I think, and Mary and Carl were always in good humor, very can-do all the time. My crew was really enjoying it. We'd often have to change our plans. It rained one day, we lost a drone. We couldn't quite go as far one day on the river as we wanted to because of obstacles. But we just, I kind of went with the, to use the metaphor, the flow, and we stuck to our schedule, which was basically 4 days on the river with Mary and Carl. Although we came back later on to do more scenes when we interview people, about various aspects of the river. But yeah, so the whole feeling of the experience for me was one of an incredible joy making this film. And so it maybe makes the film a little different than your typical environmental film, where I'm not trying to do an environmental screed or making the audience feel upset or angry about things. I'm trying to get them to, like, in a way, fall in love with the river, the same way that Mary has and is, and Carl, who's really, the great thing about Carl was that he knows every inch of the river. I mean, literally, and he knew exactly what we were going to encounter at every point along the way, how to contend with it. And then we also did sit-down interviews with Mary and Carl before and after the kayak trip, where they really kind of give us the voiceover that kind of really keeps us informed about everything that's happening along the way. So, sorry to interrupt.
What I didn't tell Scott.
Go ahead.
What I didn't tell Scott was just how much poison ivy, greenbriers, multiflora rose, and other wonderful assortment of dangerous botanicals there were on the banks of the river. So, cameramen, we hope that they've recovered by now.
There's one shot, we did where we had to lay down a plastic tarp along about 20 or 30 feet of the bank because it was nothing but poison ivy. And I was asking my crew to go down there and catch them as they paddle by. So things like that. So.
Yeah, it's yes, living in the Northeast is not without its hazards. Of course, they're not quite the same as you will find in Florida, but they have hazards of their own with more teeth. But
There's-
Scott, I wanted to kind of tee off of something that you said, and address this to Mary and Carl. Scott, you were saying that it's not your typical environmental film, and you wanted to show the river. I think that the fascinating thing about the film is that, as you show both the beauty of the beginning of the river all the way, Carl, as you were mentioning, the full industrial use of the river at the end, from its best to its worst, it shows all the ways that people are always attracted to water and always attracted to making their lives by water. And maybe they can lose sight of it, or they can maybe they need to change their relationship to it. But can you speak to what it's like to be a guide along a river like that shows the kind of full breadth of the way that people interact with water?
Sure. Well, first, let me say that there's a reason why there are no guides to hire on the Passaic River. Perhaps I think just before I had paddled the length of the river the first time in 2003, I had read about this individual who had done it one time. And I thought, in the modern era, this person may be the only person that has actually done this entire trip. We don't know. We don't know for sure, but it was newsworthy enough and so astonishing. I showed people the article in the newspaper. I said, look what this guy did. Can you believe he went down that river? Because there are many wonderful, beautiful rivers in New Jersey that get tens of thousands of kayakers every year. The Batsto, the Mullica, the Wading River, the Oswego, in the beautiful Pine Barrens in the belly of New Jersey. You will find outfitters that can help you. They will take you on a bus. They'll put your boats on a trailer. They'll give you boats, paddles, and they'll get you out there and they'll pick you up. The Passaic River, so long, buddy. Hope we see you at the end. We don't know. Hope your insurance policy is up to date, right? And that's the kind of river the Passaic is. So to honor Mary's request first in 2006 to go down the river was, a question of, can we do this safely? I did it with 24 people the first time. Environmental professionals like myself, willing to take the risk on their own time to explore the river that comes up in their work, their daily work, right? There are environmental professionals who are out there doing boring logs and testing contaminants, and planners, soil scientists, geologists, engineers. We gathered together, we put together a team and said, let's find out what we don't know about this river to aid our profession. But when you take someone who, well, you haven't met before, calls you out of the blue and says, hey,
what are you doing next weekend?
What are you doing? Right. And you say, well, can we do this thing safely? That's the first priority, safety. And so again, when Scott put in that next phone call, I said, same thing. All right, what are the conditions? What are the likely conditions? What might we face? Let's put together a kind of a safety plan. Can we do this with a team of professional cameramen and audio engineers and a director who's somewhat adverse to boats, but was a real champ in the end? And
somebody asked me in one of the Q&As, so Scott, are you an outdoorsman? And I said, well, if someone, if I'm going to make a film that requires it, I'll become one. So that's sort of my approach. And I'm not, I'm active physically. I do a lot of things, but I'm not too familiar with boats. But I was in a boat.
You were,
you
yeah.
did.
Following alongside, and it was a Zodiac. It was an inflatable, raft. We had a great pilot who Carl recommended, Paul Iben, who was really able to navigate that and understood what I was after. And so anyway, so that's how I got into it.
You know, one thing
That's-
that was I thought was interesting about I'd never made a film before, so that was a unique experience for me. And the you know, Carl and I were paddling along, and we were just kind of doing our thing. And really, you kind of forget about the cameras after a while. And oftentimes the cameras were not necessarily visible to us. You know, they were on bridges above us. And but so we have one perspective of the journey that we're on. But watching the footage afterwards, you know, so the raw footage, and then of course the final film, it's like, oh wow, like all these people who were shooting, they had a relationship with the river, and the relationship that they had with the river is, you know, writ large in the film. I mean, and their relationship was, it felt so loving, you know, even when they were filming like the end of the river where you just want to cry.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that.
Oh,
That's
okay.
a spoiler.
Okay, sorry about that. Spoiler alert, yeah. But anyway, seeing it from their point of view and feeling like a kinship with that point of view was really, really powerful moment for me. And thank you, Scott, because the river, as a character, the river just really pops. It really comes across.
Well, Mary, let me ask you this then. One of the reasons why I was so attracted to this film has to do with the mission of the festival, which is we think of the festival as story and community in action. We really hope that when people see these films, of course, we want them to be, you know, captivated by the films and learn things from the films. But we really hope they take something back into their own private lives or into their own communities. And maybe starting with you, Mary, and then we can go to Carl and Scott. What would you hope that people would take away from engaging with this film?
Well, specifically, I think that they would, Scott referenced this earlier, that they would fall in love with the river. The Passaic itself, rivers in general, you know, their power and their poetry, and then just start to be aware of them and what's going on in rivers in their communities, and care. And you know, even if and caring is taking action, right? It's taking an emotional step, like, okay, I get it, I understand it, I care about this river. And then how does that translate? I don't know. Maybe they'll vote a certain way, maybe they'll start going out on the river, maybe they'll take their children out on the river, maybe they'll become activists. But I think just that, like, breaking that barrier of ignorance and lack of interest is the most important thing that I'd like. I think that's kind of a low bar, but I think you've got to get through that one first before you can do anything else.
Mhm.
Carl, do you have any?
Yeah. Well, I would like people to know that many of the people they will meet in the film are on a daily basis working very actively, very hard to re-envision this river, to reimagine it in a new age. It came through pre-colonialism as a trade route and a travel route for Native Americans. It slowly became mills and farmlands for colonials, and a source of food, so many fish. And then finally, in the industrial age, we grabbed its power as a resource. But now we're in a new place. And the EPA, of course, is working hard on the cleanup aspect of the contaminants. And agencies like NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state of New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection are working actively on those issues, and also doing more so, trying to reimagine the river and the river banks in these communities, these urban communities. Just last week, on Friday, I was at a groundbreaking for a new 5-acre park that will be on the banks of the city of East Newark, which is the second smallest municipality in New Jersey, but one of the most densely populated in the entire state. They don't have a single park in this town. They are now going to have a 5-acre park, thanks to a private and public initiative that works with monies collected through an agreement with one of the polluters to establish this beautiful new park in a town that has never had a park. It's going to have a series of woodlands. It's also going to have playgrounds. It's going to have butterfly meadows, pollinator gardens, and rain gardens, but it's also going to have kiosks and amphitheaters so that people can enjoy the riverbank in a whole new way that has never been available to this community. So that is just the beginning, I think. Truly not just a groundbreaking for one park, but really putting a flag in the ground for increasing our protection and enhancing natural resources and opportunities for people to enjoy the river. And again, you know, following the full cleanup, which could take a decade or more, it becomes even more important that we realize a new relationship to the river, because we might be able to do more boating in it. We may not worry so much about our kids like Mary's mom worried about her going down to the river and what she might find there. So yeah, we're coming to a new age. And I think that's the important lesson for me.
That's fantastic. And Scott, what would you like people to take away in terms of action that they might take?
Well, you know, to kind of tie it together, I mean, one of the challenges of making the film based on Mary's book was that, you know, not everybody she interviewed 10 years before was available, or some, you know, we lost sadly over time. And Mary and I had to really kind of revisit the whole who was going to be in the film and all the little side stories that we wanted to tell. And what I'm hoping is that people who watch this film really can connect to it through one of the 20, 30 people that we talked to on the journey. I mean, they're from all backgrounds, and the river changes character from one section to the next. And the people who live in each section are different from the other sections. So you're moving from rural areas to industrial areas to the third largest city, you know, in that at the time it was created, you know, Newark in the country. So I'm hoping there's a way for people to connect with the film. And I think, you know, in terms of an overarching message, if you don't mind, I got this quote from someone who saw the film, an audience member, who actually says it better than I've ever been able to say. If you don't mind, it's only a short paragraph. I'd like to read it. And this came through actually a friend of Mary's, I think, who saw the film online. And the quote is, the filmmakers draw hope out of ecological disaster without preaching, without invoking dreadful end time scenarios. Writer and ecologist Mary Bruna, with ebullience and genuine curiosity, expresses her love for the river, respect for the voices of the people she meets along its banks, an utterly persuasive argument for preserving the natural world by allowing viewers to have their own, perhaps newly birthed agency in the matter. And I love that quote, you know, and that's what I wanted to do in the film. I wanted to like really inspire people.
That's terrific. So to wrap up, I want to ask each of you what's next for you, and also how people can support the film. What's next for the film? So let's start with Mary, go to Carl, and then Scott, you can wrap up.
Well, I'm sticking with water. When I was reporting on the Passaic River book, I interviewed a geologist who was with the USGS in New Jersey at the time, and he studied aquifers, and I got kind of fascinated by aquifers. So I'm working on a book about aquifers and inner lives. And for the film, I mean, I just hope that as many people as possible get to see it and get to be inspired by it, and maybe in some ways shift their perspective on themselves in the natural world.
Carl?
Well, my focus is still on paddling rivers in my spare time, and I will be paddling this weekend in a little effort called Paddle for the Bay, which it takes place on New Jersey's Barnegat Bay. And the effort here is to set a world record for the most kayaks ever assembled in one place in a flotilla. The current record is held by Poland, and we hope to eclipse that by several hundred. And I believe we're looking for 400 or more. boats to all assemble on the Toms River and paddle out to the Barnegat Bay. That's my immediate goal. but my long-term goal is to continue working for the environment, to continue working on urban river issues, which is my day job. I am what might be called a restoration ecologist, which is to say we plan for and restore ecological components that are missing, in this case, from urban areas. New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania is the area I work in. And I work on these Superfund cases. And I'm hoping to work with my many colleagues to continue striving for improving many of the rivers in this area, not just the Passaic, but the Raritan, the Hudson, and well, many more. There are many rivers to cross, as the song goes.
That need help, yeah.
Yeah.
Scott?
Well, my focus right now is in getting this film out. It was over 3 years in production, and we've been working on marketing it and getting it out for people to see, which really follows up on what Mary has said. And it's a huge job as an independent filmmaker. You really have to spend years sometimes to promote a film and get it out. And we're doing that through festivals. We're optimistic. Well, actually, we have a deal with an educational distributor in the works. We're optimistic about television or streaming at some point, but that takes time. And it's all going to keep me quite busy for the rest of this year and well into next. I don't have another film planned yet. That will come when it comes, you know. I'm also very happy about the fact that it's going to be at the Global Peace Film Festival. And I strongly recommend people to go and watch the trailer on the website. It's 2 minutes long, and you'll get a taste of the film, and it's pretty exciting. The screenings are going to be on September 23rd and 24th. And come down whoever watches this video if you're able to make it. And I'm going to be there to answer questions with the audience as well. So I think that's sort of where we're at right now. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. We are really looking forward to hosting you, Scott. We're so sorry, Mary and Carl, that you can't join us because we've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. This has been terrific. Thank you for your work. And we want to thank everyone who's watched today's Glow, and remind everyone that you can find out all the information about American River, the film, at americanriver.film. Also, I would highly recommend that you seek out Mary Bruno's film, An American River from Paradise to Superfund. This is, an incredible journey that you will see in American River. So I really urge you to seek out both of those sites. And again, our dates for our in-person screenings begin September 19th and end September 25th. And our virtual programming picks up September 26th and ends October the 2nd. All of our information can be found at the Global Peace Film Festival website, which is peacefilmfest.org. And thank you all again, and we'll see you at the next Glow.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah. Thank you, Nina and Kelly. Thank you.